she could blame someone else. She could blame Ian Brady and he can blame her. I don't know, but she felt that you didn't, or the world didn't, or the country didn't have the right to lock her up. Nobody had any rights except Myra. They should smack her on the hand and put her in the next car.
She felt it was unjustified locking her up, taking away her civil liberties. She couldn't even vote. Why should she be in prison when she hadn't done nothing?
Hindley still had one last link with her past which didn't fit with her new image of innocence. Ian Brady. She'd been writing to him ever since their arrest, but now she wanted to finish with him, and she was sure her new friend Carol would help.
She said, "Oh, I'm sick of reading his letters and writing replies to him." She said, "If I give you his letters, can you draft a reply?" Yeah, I said I could fit it in, I suppose. So she could just copy out what I'd said on the prison notepaper and post it off to him. But what brought a big relief to all of us, really, was that Christmas in 1970. There was a postal strike and it was for 6 weeks. So nobody had to write letters to anybody, and I was glad. And she was glad. So that was the end of Ian Brady.
But Hindley had already moved on. In jail, she quickly realised that lesbian relationships were a way to control fellow inmates and gain protection. She soon became what was known as prison bent.
There was something about Myra that most all of the lesbians liked. Maybe she looked butch to them. I don't know, but it was always a girlfriend, like a minion. Not only was she useful sexually, but she would clean and polish Myra's cell, wash and iron her clothes, and generally, you know, be servile. That's the way I saw it anyway. But then somebody did come into Myra's life that rocked it and turned it upside down.
After a string of affairs with other prisoners, Hindley was starting to look a little further afield.
From our cells you could see the officers coming on duty, going off duty, and she went, "Oh, look at her, who's that? She's nice." And she was kind of falling in love with her and she didn't even know her name.
Hindley's roving eye had fallen on prison officer Pat Cairns, an ex-Carmelite nun from her hometown in Manchester.
She said to me, "What'll I do?" I said, "Well, write her a letter. I'll give it to her, just for a bit of fun, you know." And then the night before Myra's birthday, 22nd of July 1970, she came to my door. I said, "Is that you, Miss Cairns?" She said, "Yeah." I said, open me up, I got a letter for you from Myra." Without hesitation, she unbolted the door and took the letter and then locked me back in again. And the next day was Myra's birthday, and Pat Cairns came galloping up the stairs. Myra saw her, and there they were having a bit of a kiss and a cuddle, and then the affair started from then on.
Affairs between officers and inmates were strictly forbidden. Hindley came up with a way of conducting hers right under the prison authorities' nose.
They used to use the church. I said to Myra, "You're no more religious than I am at that time. You don't belong to any faith, so why'd you go to the church?" She said, "Well, actually, you know, it's so private. Me and Pat can meet in there."
And they'd be up in my cell, I'd be underneath my bed, and I'd be outside the door with a scrubbing brush. And I'd said to them, the first thing that came into my head, if a screw starts coming up the stairs, I'll be, "To be a pilgrim." So they would wait for that, and if they heard that, they would quickly put their clothes straight and be sitting up and looking at some of my work or looking at anything. But I'm sure one or two of the officers knew anyway. They turned a blind eye to it. They were just so close together, you couldn't cut them with a knife. You couldn't separate the two.
But an affair between an inmate and a screw had no future. Their only hope lay beyond the walls of Holloway, and that depended on Hindley's chances of release.
At that time, Myra was doing an open university degree on humanities, and what had happened was she'd asked if she could be released to pick up her diploma. She'd passed, and they'd actually said no, and she went ballistic, absolutely ballistic. She said, "I am never gonna get out of this place, ever." I'd said, you know, the only way you're ever going to get out of here is if you jump the wall. So why don't you give it a try? And she was like, do you know what? I've got a better idea. And Pat was like, well, I have all the keys. I can do night duty. You can make keys, can't you? And I was like, yeah. And she said, well, if I bring all the equipment in, do you think you can make a set of the entire keys? And I said, yeah, for sure.
It was just absolutely, oh, I don't know, I can't think of a word to describe it, because there must have been, with Crazy in Love too? I don't know, but it definitely was something that was out of this world.
Myra was absolutely seven heavens. She was making arrangements. They were going to live happily ever after in some country, I don't know, it was France or South America or somewhere.
The lax atmosphere at Holloway in the 70s made escape actually seem possible. Incredibly, Hindley was able to change her name by deed poll to Myra Spencer. She even had secret pictures taken with a new passport in mind. Now all they needed were the duplicate keys.
Pat finally brought up the right equipment, all the keys, and I did all the impressions perfectly. Then I had to rack my brains, where do I send them? So I said to her, okay, send them to this guy and he will make the keys for you. And then I waited.
There wasn't long to wait. The locksmith handed the key impression straight over to the police.
And that's when they came and got me and said, we're Special Branch.
And Hindley's first real dream of freedom was over.
I said to her, basically, I don't think I'm going to be seeing you again. And she went, what? And I said, I think I'm going to get nicked. I've just been called to the office. And I took some delight in turning around and saying to her, well, that's me done, and that's you done. Bye.
One interview with Special Branch detectives later, Anne began to talk.
You're between a rock and a hard place. I'm going to swim. I'm not going to sink. For what? A child killer? And an officer? No, I'm sorry. Eventually, Pat Kearns found her way down, and she said, what have you told them? And I said, everything. And she said, what about? And I said, the truth. And her last words to me were, I'll pray for you. And I said, pray for yourself, not me.
The prayers went unanswered. Myra Hindley and Pat Kearns were tried at the Old Bailey for attempted jailbreak, and Kearns got sent down for 6 years.
Pat Kearns was a nice person before she met or came under the influence of Myra Hindley. So were lots of other people. Myra Hindley, when she went in prison, she didn't stop murdering, but she murdered minds and she murdered spirits. In Pat Kearns' case, it was just another sexual power relationship. Pat Kearns was a means to an end.
With the escape attempt foiled and her officer lover imprisoned, Hindley would have to find another way out of jail. But first, her punishment was to be shipped off to Durham, the toughest, most secure prison in Britain.
It was the big, Victorian kind of prison, and I remember going in through the prison gate and the sound of the, the sound of the gates shutting. and the turning of locks. And I met her in a visiting room. I can't remember the details of the visiting room, but I can remember it was depressing. You know, little tables and chairs and smoky kind of atmosphere. It was depressing.
Prison visitor Sarah Trevelyan had been giving support to Hindley over a number of years.
What is significant about Durham, it was a men's prison, and then they created within Durham a secure unit for women. So she was surrounded by hostility even more then. They all described it as a concrete tomb, really. It was a prison within a prison, and it was a place of despair.